What if Napoleon won the Battle of Waterloo? Part 1. The son of Austerlitz over Waterloo. We are often told that history is a series of inevitable events, that the fall of empires and the rise of nations are preordained by the tides of time. We are taught that Napoleon Bonaparte's defeat at Waterloo on June 18, 1815, was the natural conclusion to an era of overreach. We've grown up in a world shaped by that defeat, a world of British global dominance, the rise of a unified Germany, and the English language as the undisputed bridge of the planet. But what if the rain that turned the fields of Belgium into a muddy swamp had stopped just a few hours earlier? What if the most brilliant military mind of the age had one more miracle left in him? Imagine the scene at 11 a.m. In our present reality, the ground was too wet for Napoleon to move his heavy artillery, forcing a delay that allowed the Prussian army to join the fray. But in this timeline, the summer sun is relentless. The ground dries. The French cannons, the Grand Battery, open fire with a devastating, synchronized roar 3 hours ahead of schedule. The thin red line of Wellington's infantry isn't just tested. It is obliterated before the first British bayonet is even fixed. In a single afternoon, the trajectory of the 19th century is hijacked. The English century, we know, is snuffed out in the smoke of the Belgian countryside. Would you be prepared to live in a world where the French tricolor flies over London, where the metric system was enforced with the sword, and where the very concept of a European Union was achieved through conquest rather than treaty 2 centuries ago? Today, we are opening the great loop of history, a world where the eagle never fell. We're exploring the collapse of the British Empire in its infancy, the suppression of the German spirit under French law, and a modern landscape where Paris is the undisputed capital of the human race. Chapter 1. The Shattered Square. The tactical reality of Waterloo was a game of inches and minutes. In our history, the British squares held firm against the desperate charges of the French cavalry. But with the artillery softening the ground and the ranks hours earlier, the squares don't hold. Imagine the sheer psychological shock as the French cuirassiers, men clad in steel breastplates, looking like relics of a medieval age, break through the British center. Wellington, the Iron Duke, is forced to retreat toward the coast, not in an orderly fashion, but in a chaotic scramble for the English Channel. The relatability effect here is found in the sudden, terrifying silence that falls over London. For decades, the British public felt protected by the wooden walls of their Royal Navy, but they never truly believed a French boot would touch English soil. Now, with their finest army shattered in Belgium, the panic is total. The stock market in London doesn't just dip, it vanishes. This is the moment where the emotional anchor of British pride is broken. Napoleon didn't just win a battle. He broke the spine of the global coalition against him. By the evening of June 18th, the Prussian army under Blücher arrives not to save the day, but to witness a slaughter. The French army, emboldened by the collapse of the British, turns its full fury on the exhausted Prussians. This is the pattern break of the Napoleonic Wars. Instead of the slow, grinding retreat of the 1813 and 1814 campaigns, the emperor has achieved a lightning victory that makes Austerlitz look like a skirmish. The Seventh Coalition, the final alliance against him, evaporates in less than 12 hours. Chapter 2. The Flight of the Coalition. In the weeks following Waterloo, the capitals of Europe are seized by a frantic, existential dread. In our present reality, the Congress of Vienna was busy redrawing the map of Europe to ensure a balance of power. But in this world, the Congress of Vienna is interrupted by the news that Napoleon is marching on Berlin. The diplomats who were so eager to carve up the French Empire are now fleeing in their carriages, their treaties turned to scrap paper. Napoleon's strategy is no longer one of total conquest, but of forced diplomacy. He has learned from his exile on Elba. He doesn't want to occupy every village. He wants to create a system where every European crown is dependent on the French throne. This is the birth of the Pax Napoleonica. He offers a peace that is both generous and suffocating. To the common people, he is the liberator, bringing the Code Napoleon, a system of laws that grants equality, religious freedom, and the abolition of feudalism. To the kings and queens, he is the usurper who has stolen their birthright. Imagine the tension in a city like Vienna or Amsterdam. You aren't being conquered by a foreign army. You are being integrated into a modern system. The French administration brings with it a level of efficiency and bureaucracy that the old world simply cannot match. This is the relatability of the Napoleonic era, the transition from the chaotic, traditional world of the 18th century to the organized, industrial world of the 19th, but with a French accent. Chapter 3. The Second Reign, 1816 and the Peace of Paris. By the start of 1816, the second reign of Napoleon is no longer a desperate gamble. It is a solid reality. The Peace of Paris is signed, but it is a vastly different document than the one in our history books. France retains its natural borders, the Rhine, the Alps, and the Pyrenees. But more importantly, the continental system, the economic blockade against Britain, is finally enforced with total efficiency. Britain, isolated and with its army in ruins, faces an internal collapse. In our world, the British Empire spent the 19th century as the world's workshop. In this timeline, the British economy is a closed loop, suffocating under the weight of French naval dominance in the English Channel. The high stakes here are shifted. The battle is no longer fought with muskets, but with trade and tariffs. Napoleon realizes that to truly win, he doesn't need to burn London. He just needs to make it irrelevant. The French Empire becomes the center of a new, integrated European economy. The metric system is standardized from Moscow to Madrid. A single currency, the Napoleon d'or, becomes the standard for trade. This early European economic community accelerates the Industrial Revolution in a way we can barely imagine. Instead of competing national interests, you have a continent-wide labor force working toward a single goal, the glory of the empire. This is the moment where the emotional anchor of European unity is forged in the fires of French ambition. Chapter 4. The Suppression of the German Spirit. In our present reality, the 19th century was defined by the rise of German nationalism, leading eventually to the unification of Germany and the global wars of the 20th century. But in the world of the Pax Napoleonica, the German question is answered with a firm French hand. Prussia, the military powerhouse of our history, is dismantled. Its lands are divided among the smaller German states that formed the Confederation of the Rhine, a collection of puppet states loyal to Paris. The German intellectuals, the poets, and the philosophers who dreamed of a unified fatherland are forced underground. The German language is relegated to the status of a local dialect, while French becomes the language of the elite, the law, and the future. Imagine a 19th century where the great works of science and literature are not published in Berlin or Vienna, but in Paris. This suppression of German identity is an open loop that will haunt the empire for decades. It is a world where the pattern of European history, the struggle between France and Germany, is frozen in French favor. As we move toward the mid-19th century, the question isn't whether Napoleon can hold Europe, but what happens when this French-led continent looks across the Atlantic. The eagle has conquered the old world, but the new world of America is still a wild, unpredictable frontier. Napoleon's gaze begins to shift from the plains of Germany to the ports of Louisiana. The stage is set for a global confrontation that will decide the fate of the Americas. But first, we must see how the French peace reshapes the very soul of the European people. Part 2. The Hunger of Albion and the King of Rome. Chapter 5. the hunger of Albion. In our present reality, the 19th century is often called the Age of Britannia, a time when the British Navy ruled the waves and London was the financial heart of the world. But in the years following the French victory at Waterloo, a very different reality sets in. Napoleon's continental system, a total economic blockade of the British Isles, is finally enforced with a terrifying military precision. In our history, the blockade was porous and filled with smugglers. But with the British Army destroyed and the French Navy dominating the coastlines of Europe, the blockade becomes a noose. Imagine the atmosphere in London in the late 1810s. The docks of the Thames, once the busiest in the world, are silent. Warehouses are filled with cotton that cannot be sold and sugar that cannot be exported. The relatability effect here is the sudden, grinding poverty of a nation that thought it was invincible. There are no riots for liberty. There are only riots for bread. The British pound, once the gold standard of the globe, collapses as the nation is forced into a state of primitive self-sufficiency. Napoleon didn't need to launch a risky invasion across the Channel. He simply waited for the British Empire to starve itself into submission. This economic strangulation is the pattern break that ends the British global experiment before it truly began. Chapter 6: The King of Rome and the Napoleonic Dynasty. One of the greatest fears of the old European monarchs was not just Napoleon himself, but his legacy. In our history, Napoleon's son, the King of Rome, died in obscurity in Vienna. But in this timeline, he is the centerpiece of a new global order. By the 1820s, the aging emperor begins to transition power to his son, Napoleon II. This is the moment where the emotional anchor of stability is cast. The world realizes that the Napoleonic Empire isn't a flash in the pan. It is a dynasty that intends to rule for centuries. Napoleon II is raised not as a soldier of the revolution, but as a technocrat emperor. He is the bridge between the old glory of the battlefield and the new glory of the factory. Imagine the coronation of the young emperor in Notre Dame, broadcast, not through television, of course, but through the fastest courier networks and semaphore towers ever built. He represents a safe future for the European middle class. He doesn't offer endless war. He offers order and progress. The legitimacy of the Bonaparte family becomes unquestioned, and the old royal houses of Europe, the Bourbons, the Habsburgs, the Romanovs, are relegated to the dusty corners of history books as failed experiments in feudalism. Chapter 7: The Industrial Eagle. In our current day and age, we associate the Industrial Revolution with the soot-stained cities of northern England. But in the world of the Pax Napoleonica, the center of the industrial world is the blue banana of the French Empire, stretching from Paris to the iron-rich regions of the Rhine. Without the constant drain of war and the competition of British manufacturing, French science and industry explode. Napoleon had always been a patron of the sciences, and his son takes this to the next level. Imagine the imperial steamworks in Lyon or the massive canal systems connecting the Danube to the Rhine. The metric system provides a universal language for engineers, allowing a locomotive built in Italy to run perfectly on tracks in Poland. This is the relatability of a standardized world. Innovation is not driven by private profit alone, but by state directives. The first ironclad ships and the first continental telegraph lines are built not for trade, but to bind the empire together. The world enters a French industrial age, where the aesthetic is not Victorian clutter, but the clean, neoclassical lines of the empire style. Chapter 8: The French Ocean. With Britain neutralized and Europe unified, the Atlantic Ocean is no longer a British lake. It is the French Ocean. Napoleon's gaze begins to shift across the water toward the Americas. In our history, the Louisiana Purchase was a desperate sale to fund a war. In this timeline, France never sells. New Orleans becomes the Paris of the West, a massive, fortified hub of French influence in the heart of the North American continent. This creates a fascinating curiosity bridge to the geopolitical landscape of the Americas. The young United States finds itself squeezed between a French-controlled Louisiana and a French-aligned Canada. The American dream of westward expansion is blocked by the imperial reality of French military outposts. The global language of trade is no longer English, but French. If you want to do business in the ports of New York or the markets of Canton, you must speak the language of the emperor. The global map is being redrawn, but the most dangerous challenge to the empire isn't coming from a foreign nation. It's coming from the very ideas that Napoleon himself unleashed. Part 3. The Global Eagle and the Resistance of Nations. Chapter 9. The Global Eagle and the Conquest of the Orient. In our present reality, the 19th century saw a desperate scramble for Africa and the consolidation of the British Raj in India. But in a world where the British Navy was forced into a defensive posture around its own starving islands, the map of the world was claimed by the French Eagle decades earlier. Napoleon had always been obsessed with the East. His Egyptian campaign of 1798 was just a prelude to his true dream, the dismantling of the Ottoman Empire and the creation of a French-led gateway to the Orient. By the middle of the 19th century, this dream is a physical reality. Imagine the Suez Canal being completed not in 1869, but in the 1830s, engineered by the Imperial Corps of Bridges and Roads. This French canal becomes the jugular vein of global trade. Without British interference, the Indian Ocean becomes a French lake. The relatability effect here is the shift in global culture. In this timeline, the exotic influences on Western fashion and food don't come from London's colonies, but from the French territories of Indochina, Egypt, and the Levant. This isn't just colonization, it is the Francization of the globe. The tricolor flies over ports from Alexandria to Saigon, and the global lingua franca is not English, but the sophisticated tongue of the Parisian elite. Chapter 10. The Cultural Sun. Paris as the center of the universe. In our current day and age, we look to New York, London, or Tokyo as the hubs of global culture and finance. But in the Pax Napoleonica, there is only one sun around which the world revolves: Paris. Under the reign of Napoleon II, Paris is rebuilt into the capital of the human race. It is a city of marble, wide boulevards, and massive monuments that make our version of the city look modest. Every scientist, every artist, and every philosopher knows that to matter, they must be in Paris. Imagine a 19th century where the great innovations of the era, the photograph, the telegram, and early medicine, are all stamped with the imperial seal. There is no Hollywood in this world. The global stories are told through the lens of the Imperial Academy of Arts. The emotional anchor for the people of this era is a sense of overwhelming, centralized grandeur. You don't feel like a citizen of a country. You feel like a subject of a global civilization. But this cultural hegemony comes with a price. The diversity of the human experience is flattened under the weight of French universalism. If you aren't speaking French and following the Code Napoleon, you are simply uncivilized. This creates a curiosity gap for the modern viewer. What happened to the unique cultures of the world when one Kaiserreich decided it was the only one that mattered? Chapter 11. The Resistance Within, the Underground Coalitions. However, beneath the polished surface of the imperial peace, the fires of nationalism are beginning to smolder. In our history, the year 1848 was the springtime of nations, a series of revolutions that challenged the old order. In the Napoleonic timeline, 1848 is the year of the underground coalitions. The German intellectuals, the Italian patriots, and the Polish dreamers have realized that they cannot defeat the French eagle on the battlefield. Instead, they turn to this shadow war. Secret societies, modeled after the Carbonari, begin to coordinate across borders using the very telegraph lines the empire built to control them. This is the pattern break of the mid-century. The threat to the empire isn't an invading army, but a virus of ideas. Imagine the tension in a French-administered Berlin or Rome. The streets are calm during the day, but at night, the walls are covered in illegal posters calling for liberté from the very people who claim to have invented it. The high stakes are shifted from massive infantry charges to the whispered conversations in darkened cellars. Napoleon III, taking the throne as the third of his line, is faced with a terrifying realization. You can conquer a land, but you cannot permanently colonize the mind. Chapter 12. The Iron Emperor's Shadow and the Imperial Grid. To combat this rising tide of dissent, the Napoleonic state evolves into something far more sophisticated and terrifying than the absolute monarchies of the past. This is the birth of the Imperial Grid. Using the massive administrative data collected through the Code Napoleon, the state begins to create the first true surveillance society. This isn't the digital surveillance of our present reality, but a mechanical panopticon. Every citizen is a file in a massive central archive in Paris. Their movements, their taxes, and their loyalties are tracked through a network of informants and regional governors. This is the relatability of the modern bureaucratic state, born a century early. The empire becomes an iron machine, where efficiency is valued above all else. The pattern break here is the shift from the romantic, heroic age of Napoleon I to the cold, industrial management of his successors. The world is safe, the world is prosperous, but the world is recorded. As we move toward the turn of the century, the question is no longer if the empire will fall, but whether humanity can ever find its way back to a world where it isn't just a cog in the imperial engine. Part 4. The American Chessboard and the Wings of the Eagle. Chapter 13. The American Chessboard. In our present reality, we often think of the 19th century United States as an unstoppable force of westward expansion, a nation destined to stretch from sea to shining sea. But in the world of the Pax Napoleonica, that destiny is hit by a wall of French steel. Because Napoleon never sold the Louisiana Territory, the young American Republic finds itself squeezed against the Atlantic coast. Imagine a map where the Mississippi River is not a highway for American trade, but a heavily fortified imperial border, bristling with French forts and customs houses. This creates a Cold War of the 19th century. On one side, you have the rising American spirit of democracy. On the other, the polished, professional machine of the French Empire. The relatability effect here is profound. Imagine the tension of a border that doesn't just divide land, but divides two entirely different ways of life. For the Americans, the West is no longer a land of opportunity, but a forbidden territory controlled by a foreign emperor. This geographical strangulation forces the United States into a state of permanent military alert. They don't build railroads to transport grain, they build them to move troops. The American dream is fundamentally altered, becoming more cautious, more militarized, and deeply resentful of the eagle that watches them from across the river. Chapter 14. The Wings of the Eagle. While the ground was being fortified, the French Empire was already looking toward a new frontier, the sky. In our current day and age, we think of the Wright brothers as the pioneers of flight, but in this timeline, the necessity of maintaining a global empire accelerates aviation by decades. Napoleon had always seen the value of the Aerostires, the world's first air force of observation balloons. Under his successors, this fascination turns into a massive industrial program. Imagine the sky over a 19th century city being filled not just with smoke, but with the majestic silhouettes of imperial cloud cutters, massive, hydrogen-filled dirigibles, and sophisticated gliders used for rapid communication and surveillance. The pattern break Here is the psychological impact of being watched from above a century before the invention of the satellite. The empire uses these wings of the eagle to maintain control over its vast territories, spotting rebellions before they can start and delivering orders at speeds that make the traditional horse messenger obsolete. The sky is no longer a place of wonder. It is a tool of imperial management. This technological leap ensures that the French grip on the world is not just horizontal, but vertical. Chapter 15. The Metric Revolution and the Earth Shapers. In our present reality, we worry about the environmental impact of industry, but in the world of the Pax Napoleonica, the environment is seen as just another territory to be conquered and standardized. This is the era of the Earth Shapers. Using the absolute efficiency of the metric system and the centralized wealth of the imperial treasury, French engineers embark on projects that would seem impossible in our history. Imagine the Sahara Desert being irrigated by massive, steam-powered pumping stations, or the Alps being pierced by a dozen railway tunnels decades before they were technically feasible. The empire doesn't adapt to nature. It forces nature to adapt to the Code Napoleon. Every forest is measured, every river is dammed, and every mountain is mapped with a cold, mathematical precision. The relatability of this era is the loss of the wild. In this world, there are no uncharted territories or mysterious wildernesses. Everything has been calculated, categorized, and put to work for the glory of Paris. This total victory over the natural world creates a planet that is incredibly productive, but also eerily silent. A world where the wild heart of the earth has been tamed by a ruler in a cocked hat. Chapter 16. The sun never sets on the tricolor. By the closing decades of the 19th century, the Napoleonic system has achieved something no other empire in history ever managed: a truly global, integrated civilization. From the streets of New Orleans to the markets of Saigon, the world speaks one language, follows one law, and uses one currency. The high stakes of the old world, the constant threat of war between rival nations, has been replaced by the iron stability of a single superpower. But this stability is a gilded cage. As the empire moves toward the modern era, the gap between the glittering elite in Paris and the industrial subjects in the provinces grows into a chasm. The emotional anchor for the people of this time is a sense of being trapped in a machine that is too big to fail and too efficient to change. They live in a world of perfect order, but they long for the chaos of freedom. As we look toward the final transition into our current day and age, the question is not whether the empire can be defeated from the outside, but whether it can survive the weight of its own perfection. The eagle has conquered the world, the sky, and nature, but it has yet to conquer the restless soul of a humanity that was born to be free. Part 5. The Eternal Century and the Metric Peace. Chapter 17. The Imperial Autumn and the Long 19th Century. In the history we know, the long 19th century came to a violent, bloody end in the trenches of 1914. It was a century defined by the competition of rival empires, culminating in a global explosion that changed everything. But in the world where the eagle triumphed at Waterloo, the 19th century never truly ended. It didn't explode, it matured. Without the rise of a militant Prussia or the frantic naval arms race with Britain, the Imperial Autumn became a period of unprecedented forced stability. Imagine a world where the aesthetic of the 1800s, the grand architecture, the formal social structures, and the belief in order and progress persisted for an extra 100 years. The Napoleonic dynasty, now in its fifth and sixth generations, moved away from the raw militarism of the first emperor and became a symbol of scientific governance. The relatability effect here is the feeling of a world that is incredibly sophisticated but strangely old-fashioned. It is a world where the horse and carriage were replaced not by the chaotic sprawl of the automobile, but by the clean, silent efficiency of a continental high-speed rail network, all radiating from the heart of Paris. The high stakes were no longer about surviving a war, but about maintaining the metric peace, a global system where every friction was smoothed away by imperial decree. Chapter 18. The metric peace and the end of ideology. In our present reality, the 20th century was a battlefield of ideologies, democracy, communism, and fascism fighting for the soul of humanity. But in the world of the Eternal Empire, those ideologies were never allowed to take root. Napoleon's greatest legacy was the Code Napoleon, a legal framework so efficient and so universal that it made political revolution seem unnecessary. Why fight for a new system when the current one provides equality under the law, professional administration, and economic security? The metric peace was the result of a planet that had been synchronized. Every clock on Earth was set to Paris time. Every schoolchild from Brazil to Vietnam studied the same scientific curriculum. This created a unique, emotional anchor for humanity, a sense of belonging to a singular, rational civilization. But look closer at this peace, and you see the cost. In our current day and age, we value the clash of ideas, believing that progress comes from debate. In the Napoleonic world, progress comes from direction. It is a world where the pattern of human history has been solved. There is no politics, there is only administration. This is the ultimate triumph of the Napoleonic dream, a world that is perfectly organized, perfectly stable, and profoundly silent. Chapter 19. The Modern Map, the Contemporary Era. If you were to look at a map of the world in our current day and age in this timeline, the colors would be remarkably uniform. The United States of Europe, a dream in our world, is a centuries-old reality under the French crown. The Americas are a patchwork of French territories and client republics that follow the lead of Paris in all things. The global lingua franca is French, but it is a French that has absorbed words from every corner of the globe, becoming a truly universal tongue. The technology of this contemporary era is a masterpiece of imperial industrialism. Without the waste of 2 world wars, the focus remained on massive infrastructure. The oceans are crossed by sea trains, massive, nuclear-powered vessels that are moving cities. The sky is filled with the descendants of the early dirigibles, silent and majestic. There is a version of the Internet, but it is the Imperial Archive, a centralized, monitored network designed for the sharing of knowledge and the management of the grid, not for the chaos of social media. The relatability effect for a citizen of this world is a life of absolute security. You never worry about war, you never worry about economic collapse, and you never worry about your place in the world. The Empire has thought of everything. Chapter 20. The Mirror of Waterloo. As we reach the end of our journey through this Napoleonic world, we must return to that muddy field in Belgium. We often view Waterloo as a victory for freedom over tyranny. But as we have seen, history is rarely that simple. The defeat of Napoleon led to the rise of the British Empire, the unification of Germany, and the global conflicts that defined our own century. The victory of Napoleon would have led to a world of order, unity, and a peace enforced by the sword. We are left with the great mirror of history. In our world, we have the freedom of the individual, but we live with the constant threat of division and conflict. In the world of the eagle, they have the peace of the collective, but they live in a world where the individual is a servant of the system. This is the pattern break of our investigation. There is no perfect timeline. Every victory has its price, and every defeat opens a new path. Napoleon's win would have saved us from the horrors of the 20th century, but it might have cost us the very thing that makes us human, the right to choose our own path, however messy it may be. Chapter 21. the final legacy. The world of the Pax Napoleonica is a world of marble and iron, a planet that has been tamed and organized by a single will that refused to blink at Waterloo. It is a world of staggering beauty and terrifying efficiency. As the sun sets over the grand boulevards of this contemporary Paris, we see a humanity that is safe, prosperous, and unified. But we also see a world that has forgotten what it means to struggle for an idea. The eagle has flown higher than anyone could have imagined, but in doing so, it has cast a shadow that covers the entire earth. It is a world where the sun of Austerlitz never set, and perhaps that is the greatest tragedy of all. For it is in the darkness and in the struggle that the most brilliant sparks of human creativity are often born. Thank you for exploring this alternate history with us. The world where Napoleon won is a fascinating reminder that a single afternoon can change the destiny of every human being for centuries to come. Now, I want to hear from you in the comments, because this is the ultimate question of political philosophy. If you had the choice, would you live in our world, with all its wars, chaos, and individual freedoms? Or would you choose the Napoleonic world, where the planet is unified, war is a memory, and life is perfectly organized, but your path is decided for you by the state? Which price is higher? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The debate starts now.